Hello, everybody. My name is Zach Porter. I'll be going over Chapter 7, Assuring Safety and Security in Healthcare Institutions. This chapter was rather long, so bear with me, and I'll try to get through it as fast as possible. Next slide. Management of safety and security in healthcare institutions is crucial to controlling risk. Only an aggressive and well-organized safety and security risk management program can protect an institution. Usually programs include the following steps: assessing the risks facing the organization, assessing responsibility for the management, allocating the resources necessary to manage them, adopting policies and procedures to prevent risks, and monitoring compliance with those policies and procedures. Next slide. How regulation and accreditation affect risk. Federal Medicare and Medicaid requirements. Management of safety and security risk in any hospital accepting Medicare or Medicaid payment requires that the institution satisfy all conditions of participation promulgated by the CMS under Title 18 of the Social Security Act. Authorities having jurisdiction. All hospitals, regardless of whether they participate in Medicare, must comply with the rules of their respective state's Department of Health. Whether acting on behalf of the CMS or on its own, the Department of Health is the primary authority having jurisdiction over a non-military healthcare institution. Accreditation. A hospital is deemed to be compliant with all CMS conditions of participation if it is accredited by one of the three independent organizations accorded deemed status by CMS. The oldest of the three being the Joint Commission, and the other two being D&V Healthcare Incorporated and the American Osteopathic Association's Health Facilities Accreditation Program. The difference between safety and security. Safety and security are arguably different. Common safety principles can be applied across diverse health facilities, while security planning must be site-specific. Other surveys. A state Department of Health may schedule a pre-occupancy survey of any new or renovated facility or new major clinical equipment installation. The Department of Health may also conduct a surprise inspection if it receives a serious, credible complaint from a patient or a patient's family. High-risk events. These never or adverse events include several that involve safety or security. Several considered by CMS to be hospital-acquired conditions will not be reimbursed. Next slide. Techniques for managing safety and security risk. Risk assessment. Risk assessment starts by conducting an overall inventory of the safety and security risks facing a healthcare institution. A couple categories covered would be patient safety, infection control, and fire prevention. Failure modes and effect analysis. FMEA is a structured method for examining any system, process, or complex array of equipment for risk of failure before it fails. Root cause analysis. RCA is a system-based analytic technique typically used after an adverse event occurs. This is usually to promote its reoccurrence, or to prevent, Technological redundancy. An example of effective technological redundancy is the provision of emergency electrical power to support emergency lighting, elevators, life safety equipment, and critical care equipment. Crew resource management. CRM promotes and reinforces the conscious, learned teamed behaviors of cooperation, coordination, and sharing by creating an organizational environment where specific cooperative and communicative behaviors are defined. Red rules. Red rules are the rules that cannot be broken under any circumstances. Next slide. Recognizing and responding to potential environmental hazards. Biological hazard materials. Infectious waste is defined as solid waste that contains pathogens with sufficient virulence and sufficient quantity that exposure of a susceptible human or animal to the solid waste could cause the human or animal to contract an infectious disease. Chemical waste. Chemical waste can be defined as any liquid, solid, or gaseous substances that are flammable, explosive, or toxic, or can cause air and water pollution if released into the atmosphere, or that can produce an adverse physiological reaction. Radioactive waste. Radioactive isotopes are commonly used in a variety of diagnosis and treatment methods. Next slide. Security. Protecting patient valuables. Typically, this effort involves offering patients access to secure lockers or safes. Employee theft. Many hospitals hire undercover investigators to combat employee and visitor theft. Infant abduction. The use of RFID chips that signal sensors whenever an infant is moved past the boundaries of a protected area has contributed to a plunge in abductions. Workplace violence and stress. This is a continued struggle, and violence against workers is more common in healthcare than most private sector industries. Guns and gangs. To prevent this kind of violence, some emergency departments use fixed or handheld metal detectors. Next slide. Security continued. Electronic security. The ubiquity of cell phone cameras, as well as possibly that cell phone signals will interfere with monitoring systems, has led many healthcare organizations to restrict cell phone use except in cafeterias and lounge areas. Information systems. There are many ways to help protect confidential information, such as employing a hardware firewall to block selected data from entering or leaving the institution, and using virtual private networks. These all, however, can be defeated, which raise the constant need to protect them. The Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. To help protect electronic patient information, federal regulators have developed a set of standards collectively known as the HIPAA rules. The rules stipulate that physicians, nurses, and administrators must master their principal features before being allowed to handle protected health information. Next slide. Fire safety. Most fires in healthcare facilities originate in cooking equipment, contained trash, and electrical distribution and lighting equipment. Some of the healthcare facility fire safety principles include fire-resistive construction, protection of vertical openings, and protection of hazardous areas. Practices used in healthcare facilities for fire safety include defend in place. Patients who are undergoing an invasive procedure or are in critical care may not be movable at all. Such patients are best protected through a defend-in-place strategy. Fire safety plans and training. Staff members must embrace their professional responsibility to protect and rescue patients. Typically, nurses, physicians, and others are taught to base their fire response behavior on the acronym RACE: Rescue, Alarm, Confine, Extinguish, and Evacuate. Next slide. Facility design and operation. Architecture design can improve patient safety and reduce risk. In addition to personal security and fire safety, a health institution must manage risk associated with air quality, water temperature, and construction hazards. To save time, I'm not going to go over these, but each is listed and defined for you. Next slide. Emergency preparedness. An emergency can be considered as bioterrorism, chemical emergencies, mass casualties, natural disasters, and radiation emergencies. Disaster planning. An emergency management plan must incorporate a command structure in which predefined job definitions and detailed task lists make it possible for available personnel, within the limits of their skills and training, to fill critical emergency functions. Disaster plans for information systems continuity. As computing systems have grown more powerful, healthcare institutions and practitioners have become almost totally dependent on computers for business functions and clinical support. To help protect the information, high availability disaster recovery, or HARD systems, are being implemented. They provide up to a 99.9% computing reliability, real-time data duplication, physically separated duplicate computing sites with independent emergency power, backup staffing, and networked communications topologies to eliminate disruptions from a severed cable or microwave link. Next slide. Summary. One pattern is clear. The difficulty, complexity, and cost of assuring safety and security in healthcare institutions will continue to grow. It will be a great challenge to the healthcare industry and its regulator its regulator and accrediting agencies to identify standards that yield meaningful improvements in safety and security without jeopardizing the financial integrity of the institution held to those standards. Next slide. My question would be, out of all the techniques for managing safety and security risk, which one do you think is the most effective and why? Congratulations, you made it through my Chapter 7 presentation. I hope you all learned something, and once again, I'm sorry for the length.